That's how Planet got connected to me, was from that guy.
Wait, so where does he rank on the list with us? Like, is he above?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Is he
This
below?
is like when you guys have eaten at restaurants with me before, and I'm like, this is my favorite restaurant, and there's 61 of those. Just like I have 61 best friends. You're listening to Barbell Logic, brought to you by Barbell Logic Online Coaching, where each week we take a systematic walk through strength training and the refining power of voluntary hardship. Welcome to the Barbell Logic podcast. I am your longtime veteran, old man, early to bed, early to rise host, Matt Reynolds, here with my two cohorts, Andrew Jackson and Niki Sims.
Good morning.
What we sort of privately call mission control for Block, which means that when I am having a panic attack, I can call Andrew and Niki and yell at them. And they take it. And so, which hasn't happened nearly as much in 2020, in fact, as it did in 2019.
It's been a good year.
It's true.
So, well, in spite of getting COVID and all the ridiculous craziness of 2020, it's been a good year for Matt Reynolds, which means it's probably been a decent year for you guys because you've heard less crying and wailing and gnashing of teeth as you did in 19. So welcome to the show.
We just keep burying ours deep down inside.
Yes. I just assume at some point there's that will all break loose. And, you'll murder me or remember my family. Something really terrible will happen at some point.
Oh, my God.
So, no, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. So in all honesty, and we hope that the listeners can kind of pick up on this. We really are like best friends. Like, we're super close, the three of us. We work our ass off together. We have super professional relationships. But because we have to work constantly together on the business, we've really gotten closer the last few years.
Yeah.
That was not overwhelmingly positive, Andrew. I would like a little more enthusiasm. You're like, yeah. Like I would rank you and Niki about 27 and 28th on my friend list. That's what that sounded like. What do I got to do to break into the top 20?
No, it's definitely top 5, I'd say. I mean, my wife and my daughter probably higher on the list, but
immediate family
probably
should be. But yes. No, I would agree. So we wanted to talk a little bit. We had a great suggestion about something that we've never talked about on the show before, which is when we have clients, specifically ones who are probably intermediate or even slightly beyond, who have made the decision that they would like to add some Olympic lifting to their training. How do they go about doing that? And so to kind of set this up, we have talked about really ad nauseum in the past about why you should or should not do things like power cleans or Olympic lifting, what demographics that's good for. Hopefully our 82-year-old lifters don't want to do snatches, things like that, and they don't. But so we're not really going to talk about who should and should not. We're talking to the people who are like, I've done this for a while and it sounds fun and I like to do it. I'm interested in it. And they are really cool lifts. I've done them in the past. Niki's done them a little bit in the past. Andrew's done them a lot in the past. Andrew, you've been competitive. And so that's why Andrew's primarily on here. He is certainly, out of the three of us, he's the one that has the most experience with Olympic lifting. So,
Andrew, how many weightlifting meets have you competed in?
For about 6 years, I was doing 1 or 2 a year. So it's probably somewhere around 9 or 10. Not a ton, but most all regional level competitions.
I'd love to hear some of your background. You were a competitive rower at Oregon, Oregon State.
Very importantly, I know. Oregon State Beavers, not the
Oregon
Ducks.
is the track. That's where they run track. Oregon State is where they row. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's suppose that's fair.
Which one is the
Oregon
one that Phil Knight puts all the money in?
That's Oregon.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah, that's down in Eugene.
Okay, but you're at Oregon State, and you had an outstanding rowing team, competitive rowing team, a couple guys that went to the Olympics, right?
Yep. Yeah, we tended to finish in the top 10. The year after I left, the team finished 4th in the country, which was frustrating.
So they improved after you left, is what I heard you say. They got significantly
but
better once you left.
I like to take credit for that as the legacy of our era.
Yeah, you taught them a few things, I'm sure.
Right.
Did you guys do any Olympic lifting, weightlifting, when you were on the rowing team?
Yeah, interestingly, so we would go down into the weight room, or at least a few of us would go down into the football weight room. And that's actually one of the times that I squat the most before I got into lifting. But they would just, point you in the corner and say, put it on your shoulders and do 3 sets of 10. They would not let us deadlift.
Right. It's horribly dangerous for the back.
Because the strength coach told us we'd hurt our back.
Of course.
Yep.
Yeah.
But they would let us power clean. So he taught us how to do a really crude power clean. And
far safer exercise than a deadlift.
Yeah, right. So yeah, we did
one where an exercise where you jump with a barbell in your hands. Far safer than picking something up off the floor.
Of all the things guys in college are doing, like deadlifts. Oh no, don't do those. Many other things that guys in college should be told to not do.
That's right. That's right. So Rachel keeps reading me about every other day the COVID breakout, like what the numbers are at Missouri State University here in town. It is astronomical. Like it's much higher. I keep trying to figure out why it's not on national news. Like 12% of the student population at Missouri State has COVID right now. Listen, that might be a Reynolds exaggeration, but it's not much of one if it is. Like it's like a 1 in 10 shot. You've got COVID. It's crazy. But deadlifts, them's is dangerous.
Don't do them.
Can't do that.
Don't.
So you power clean.
So did a little bit of power clean, but that was about it. And I actually met with my old rowing coach earlier this year. He's at Syracuse now, and he was picking my brain about.
No one's going to care, but the guy who's the head strength coach at Syracuse is one of my best friends. Did you know that?
I didn't know that. I did.
We're really close.
Did know
we got to
he
connect after this.
Flanick, and I was trying to make that connection.
Yes, that's how Flanick got connected to me. Was from that guy.
Wait, so where does he rank on the list with us? Like, is he?
Oh
above?
yeah, I'm sorry.
Is he
this
below?
is like. Like when you guys have eaten at restaurants with me before, and I'm like, this is my favorite restaurant, and there's 61 of those. Just like I have 61 best friends. I will say this shout out to Keith Caton. He's head football strength coach and does a bunch of other stuff too there at Syracuse. He's one of those sojourners, lifer, really good strength coaches, really dedicated to getting his people strong. He's really strong. Mm-hmm. And he was at Missouri, and that's where we got close. This is way back in the early 2000s. He was at Mizzou, and I've just sort of, we've developed a friendship and still continue to talk fairly often. And he's wild to talk to. I don't know do you know any strength coaches who have been professional, collegiate, or pro strength coaches for like 20 plus years? Because there is a common theme with all of them.
It's their outfit.
None of them have a voice.
Oh.
They all sound like... They're super hoarse and they've lost their voice because all they do is yell all the time. I haven't heard Caton's real voice, like a buttery version of Caton, in a very long time. It's all just like, it's like a sick WWE wrestler.
It's like having to be a mom for like 25 years for like,
there you go.
Annoying kids, just having to yell at them all the time.
So your coach, which was at Oregon State, is now at Syracuse.
Now at Syracuse, yeah. And we met earlier this year, and I was trying to give him some ideas about how he could get strength training incorporated into his program, and he's interested in it. But it's a big trade-off, and this is actually relatable to our conversation today. That when you're training for a sport, it's always trade-off of time, where you're going to commit your resources, and especially when you have students or you're living a busy life, you're having to look at your training time and figure out where you want to prioritize. So one of the things you have to take into account when you're deciding whether you want to do weightlifting or how you want to do weightlifting is just how to prioritize your time and be able to fit the different exercises in, because you're effectively practicing a skill.
That's right.
Along with trying to continue to get stronger. And same with the similar conversation with my coach was, he's like, yeah, I really want to do this, but it's hard to fit it in the schedule and not take away from the rowing.
How many hours a week is a Division I collegiate team rowing, like practicing some version of either being actually on the boat or on the rowers? Or did the C2 rowers originally, were those originally made for actual rowers and not for CrossFitters?
Yes. Yeah. We had them back in the 90s.
Okay. That's what I thought.
And they were before that even.
How many hours a week would you guys practice? Would you call it practice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We would. So most of the crews in the country practice in the morning because the water's calmer. So rowing kind of has typically an association with like really early morning practices. We trained on a river, and so often we could train in the afternoon and it was fine. It was the same, the water was the same in the morning, the afternoon. But then we would typically erg in the morning. So there'd be like an hour and a half in the morning. And then we'd also do, a couple hours in the afternoon. So, and then we'd do
2-3 hours a day.
Yeah. And then a Saturday morning practice.
Oof.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
You're like actively rowing that whole time.
Yeah. I mean, in the fall, there'd be a little bit less. That was the opportunity, I think, to fit in weight training if we were going to do it, would be early morning. That's when I did do it, was get up at like 5 a.m, go to the gym, and then go to class. And then in the afternoon we would train. Yeah. But for a lot of schools, that would be difficult because they're rowing at 5 or 6 in the morning.
Yeah. So then how did you transition from rowing to Olympic lifting? Was there a fairly big gap there, or did you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, because then I went into the Navy, and there was probably about 10 years there where I wasn't really doing anything competitive. Stumbled into a CrossFit gym on the way to work. Basically, that was a gym on the commute, and did just strength training I did CrossFit for about a year and then strength training for about 9 months. The coach I was working with in the morning, I was going to a 6 a.m. class. She said, hey, you should go to the evening class after work and work with this other coach that we have, because he's into weightlifting and I think you might have some fun with that. So went there and he taught me how to power clean, and I absolutely hated it. I think I actually stormed out of the gym that day, like totally pissed off, because I've never felt, I consider myself a fairly coordinated athletic guy. And the power clean left me feeling like the most awkward goober I've ever felt in my life.
That's funny.
I think I had 115 pounds on the bar and was just a total spaz.
And is this was in Seattle at the gym that I have been to? Good coach.
East Side Strength and Conditioning.
So, and he was on really the cutting edge at the time of combination, at least in the Western, in the US, of getting lifters stronger and a good Olympic weightlifting coach.
Yeah. Yeah.
Probably
Michael
didn't
Street.
know exactly how good of a coach he was.
No, well, it's interesting. I've worked with a lot of coaches, in athletics, and I definitely had a sense that he had a really good eye for movement. He was really good at cueing, but I didn't appreciate that he was definitely ahead of the curve at that time. I mean, we're talking 10 years ago.
Yeah.
About the importance of getting stronger and then applying that to the lifts.
Side note, his gym was also one of the finest organized and clean gyms I've ever been in my life.
Super clean.
I went around,
nothing on the floor.
I owned Strong. I had just opened Strong, and I went around and took pictures of everything in that gym because of how he had done prowlers hanging up on the wall, custom made chalk boxes on mounted to the walls.
Yep.
I mean, it was wonderful.
Super meticulous. And another thing I didn't appreciate until I just thought, oh, this is what CrossFit gyms are like. And then I was traveling for work and I went into I dropped in at a CrossFit gym in Arizona, and I was like, oh my God. The bucket of chalk on the ground, everything covered in grime, just stuff all over the place. Yeah. So it was a pristine gym.
You've got this session where he teaches you how to power clean, and you're like,
yep,
F this, I'm out. You leave, you storm out. That's what happened between that day and you deciding I like Olympic weightlifting.
Oh, well, you don't understand me, because when I encounter something like that, I want to do that more.
Right.
First, I'm going to throw a tantrum about it, and then I'm going to come back and get really good at it.
And dominate it. That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And I actually think that is the ingredient that's required if somebody wants to actually get into weightlifting. I don't care how old they are. I don't care how athletic they are, but they've got to actually want to do it.
Sure.
You're going to fail a lot, huh?
Yes. There's going to be a long period of frustration, and there's going to be a lot of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sometimes 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And if the mindset isn't there to push through that, then it's going to be tough. And the same is true in terms of seeing progress on the bar. So again, I think mindset is another huge component that's a little bit different than strength training. once somebody's at the intermediate level, maybe they've started to encounter this a little bit, but definitely with weightlifting, you're going to experience more day-to-day fluctuation in your performance. And that's just the nature of snatch and the clean. When you're hitting sufficiently heavy weight, have to move the bar at max force production.
Yep. And
your ability to generate max force production is going to be much different from day to day. We don't typically see that when we're programming for 3 sets of 5 or even 1 set of 5, because we're at, 70, 80, maybe 85%, 90%, maybe for a really heavy set. So there's more buffer between kind of your max effort.
So is there like a range percentage that you have to train at when you're training for the Olympic lifts? You're like only the reps that are above 80%, quote unquote, matter? How does that work?
No, I definitely think that, and there's lots of programs that program 75 to 85%, but you'll notice what 75 to 85% is will fluctuate a little bit more because your 1RM is, the percentage of fluctuation is going to be more for what your 1RM is for the day.
So let me put this into perspective with a really quick, without getting too sidetracked. We are experimenting right now, a handful of us, with a device called the Rep 1 device. You can look it up. We don't have a relationship with them. I don't make any money if you buy anything off them, but we beta tested that. I coach Andrew, and Andrew's been using it. It's the Rep 1 device. It's like the old Tendo unit. It's a velocity device. It's a little thing that sits on the floor. It connects to the barbell, and there's a thin wire between sort of this base computer and the barbell, and it measures the velocity of the bar. And so we've never done this. As a coach, there's sort of a subjective, how many millions of reps have you seen of people squatting or deadlifting, so you know about what the bar speed should be, and then how many reps have you seen for that specific lifter, because some lifters are faster or slower. And so it's been interesting as we have done things like squats and deadlifts with Andrew, and he's measuring the velocity, how much variance there is in his velocity in even the same weight of the slow lifts of the squat and the deadlift from a day-to-day basis. There's a significant velocity, sort of like, it's a pretty big variance. And so you can imagine with the fast lifts, like a snatch and a clean, like if you're not poppy that day, like it's going to be a struggle, right? And then there's days when you just, for whatever reason, you are more explosive.
Yeah, and you can't muscle through it. I mean, you can to an extent, but
there's not much of a grind.
It's going to be more like just missed reps.
Yep.
And so if you don't have a mindset of being able to accept that there's going to be that fluctuation, that can also be frustrating for somebody. So again, mindset to me is the most important thing that I try to level set with people when they're going into weightlifting. They've got to develop more of an advanced training mindset where you're going to be more variable day to day.
Sure.
Progress isn't going to be nice and linear.
Let's wrap up the story of where you went. So you got more and more into it. You started competing in about what year? When did you do your first competition?
2012, I think, was my first competition.
Okay. And got really into it. It was the thing you did for a little while.
Yeah. It was probably 5 or 6 years was all my training was organized around competing once or twice a year.
So when you think about that, the snatch and the clean and jerk are the specific lifts that you compete in, and that then means that all of these other lifts, the squat, the deadlift, if you did it, even the press, those are all lifts with the goal of pushing up general strength to help drive up the snatch and the clean and jerk, rather than say like powerlifting, where powerlifting or strength lifting and the combination of powerlifting and strength lifting, we compete in those 4 main exercises that we do with all of our clients at Block, right? The squat is the contested thing for both powerlifting and strength lifting. The bench or the press is contested, and the deadlift is contested. And so the actual thing that you're using to train, to drive general strength, is the thing you compete in. And you mentioned this at the very, you just touched on it at the very beginning of the show, where you said, what you're really doing with Olympic lifting is you're training a skill, which is really, it is a representation of how strong you are, but it isn't itself often or ever or rarely a driver itself of strength. Snatch and clean don't necessarily make you stronger. They represent how strong you are. Is that fair or no?
I would disagree with that to some extent. I've actually driven up my deadlift PR during periods of time where I was not really deadlifting.
But you were clean and heavy.
And I actually just saw this with Caleb too, with his training. We pulled deadlifts way back in his volume. And I think he was only deadlifting once or twice a month. And you can still drive progress up on his deadlift.
What was his frequency on the cleans?
We were pulling 2, 3, sometimes 4 times a week.
Gotcha.
So this is something I think from a programming standpoint is how I think about the snatch and the clean is that it's pulling volume. And
sure,
granted, you do need to have somebody who's sufficiently strong and reasonably proficient with the lifts that they're dealing with weight that's 50-60% of their deadlift, but they're doing doubles, triples, heavy singles, and that does contribute to strength. But I would agree with your first comment that what you're basically doing is combining practice with strength training. And that's one of the things from a practical difference that I would make very early with somebody who wanted to make that shift to weightlifting is that you move the snatch and the clean or the power clean, power snatch, those faster movements to the front of the program. Yep. So typically we put the pull at the end because it's the heavier lift and we want to prioritize squatting. But one of the first things you're going to do is switch those around.
Yeah. So let's get into what the programming looks like. And just from a sort of paradigm shift point, I've always equated it to something like throwing a shot put, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know that throwing a shot put, throwing shot, that is a skill. That takes a tremendous amount of technique, but it takes a lot of strength to throw a big, heavy shot.
Mm-hmm.
So we train for strength in the gym, and then we go out and practice the skill, right, in throwing the shot.
Right.
Olympic lifting is often the same way. Like we practice the Olympic lifting, the snatch and the clean, or snatch and clean and jerk. And then we still have to do a lot of general strength training to continue to drive up our general strength. And I think you would agree with this. Those things often need to occur at the same time. And so that's where that budget becomes really important, because if you throw a shot and you're pretty good at throwing shot, or you throw a baseball and you're a pitcher, or you snatch and clean and jerk and you've got pretty good technique, and you decide to stop for 6 months and just focus on strength, you come back and you are definitely stronger, but your body has changed to the point that now your technique is weird and everything feels strange.
Right.
And so you often have to continue to practice the skill while driving up the general strength. So that's where that sort of budget comes in. Like you said, there's only so much stress. And so would you guys both agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, also want to emphasize that I would say 95% of the improvement in my snatch and clean jerk going from, I think my first snatch might've been 60 kilos or something like that, probably even less, to snatching 140 kilos was because I got stronger.
Yeah.
There were some things along the way where I had to make some technical changes or shift in how I was executing the lift, but there's no way I was going to snatch over 300 pounds at the same strength level that I was when I started.
That's right.
So there's kind of two different ways to think about that. One is in the week, in the day, how you're organizing your training, but then also looking at the bigger picture where you're prioritizing your focus and you're budgeting your time for different cycles. So there's still, even though you're doing weightlifting and strength training at the same time, there's going to be periods where you're still prioritizing the strength, further away from the competition. And then as you get closer, that starts to pull back and you're putting more energy into
the skill,
heavier snatch and the skill practice.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so Niki?
I have a question.
Yep.
When someone first starts getting into this, they start practicing weightlifting.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have them just do the full versions of the lifts the most, or do you segment it? Like, okay, we're going to do hang power cleans, and we're going to focus on hang power snatch to overhead squat. Like, how specific do you get from the beginning?
I was going to ask the same question. Let me just refine as well to tighten up your answer just a tad. Well, same question.
Good idea, Niki.
Well, no. Same question he was asking, but
I'm just kidding.
Let's just have a hypothetical person who is a client, like a block client, who let's say they're on a 4-day split, and it's just sort of the standard thing, right? It's it's an intensity squat day and a volume squat day, and an intensity deadlift and a volume deadlift, right? And the same thing for bench and press. and they come to you and they say, Coach, I really want to start doing Olympic lifting. What's the first thing you do?
So usually by this point, it's somebody who's got the power already in their program.
No, let's say it's not.
Not. Okay. So that's where I would probably start with adding the power variance. That's usually how I like to do it, especially with online clients. I will break it up, and for a couple of reasons. One, just from a programming framework, I think of the lifts in sort of a heavy, light, medium perspective. So the clean and jerk, or just the clean, are typically stuff I consider heavy. A heavy snatch can also be heavy, but also sort of can be a medium lift. And then the power variants are more into sort of a light category. So I'll start to weave those power variants in as light pull days, because I'm still going to be prioritizing strength increase for them. The other reason I like to use the power variants is that I tend to teach people to think of the clean, the snatch early on as missed power cleans and missed snatches.
Explain.
So I don't like power cleans or snatches, or power snatches, I should say, that end in catastrophe, like dumping the bar, even though you've probably seen me do that.
Right.
I tend to do this more with snatches, or power snatches, I should say. I would prefer that you just catch it and then drop into a full snatch, or drop into a full
version.
clean. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because what I'm trying to teach the lifter early on is the concept of catching the bar where they pull it.
Right.
A lot of times people coming, especially out of our style of programming or style of teaching the lift, have a tendency to throw the bar way up in the air. They kind of get disconnected from the bar.
What do you mean by catch it where they pull it?
So rather than what I was just describing, where you jump the bar up and it's just sort of like floating up through the air and you're not really connected to the bar, and then it comes crashing down either onto you into the snatch or onto your shoulders, and there's this big violent crash. What I'd prefer is to train the lifter to get used to thinking about however high they pull the bar, they're meeting the bar at exactly that height with either the rack position or locking it out with their snatch.
Yep.
So I find that teaching the power variants like that helps kind of ingrain that pattern. Now, later on in their training, we have to sort of shift that thinking, because in both of the clean and the snatch, there is an element of pulling under the bar.
Sure.
But I usually tend to save that for a little bit later. And
at some point when you're really advanced, you have to actually try to get the bar as high as you possibly can, and you have to drop as low as you possibly can. Is that fair?
You don't necessarily have to get it as high as possible.
Okay.
And in fact, I think
it's wild how low you can get. I'm like, it's crazy.
Right. Well, because if you think about it, if I've got 350 pounds, or some of these guys, 500 pounds,
sure,
the higher they pull it, that's more momentum that 500 pounds is going to have by the time they catch it down in the bottom.
Right. It's going to too much force that's going to hit them with.
So if you watch the guys lifting the most, what they're incredibly good at is generating a ton of power in the extension, the jump. But then even more impressive is how fast they can go down, because they're basically minimizing the height the bar has to go.
That's right.
And then
the bar hits that peak, and it sits at that peak for a quarter of a second.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And they drop and catch it, and the bar hasn't moved hardly at all.
Exactly.
It's bizarre.
Yep.
So if you can power clean 100 kilos and you're warming up, you don't want to use it. You don't want to use 100 kilos worth of force on your 75 kilo warm up, right? You want to use just the amount of power that you need to get the bar to the height to catch it where you want to, or does that make sense?
Flip that a little bit. I still want you moving the 70 kilo load as fast and as high as you can for the power clean. But I want you meeting the bar. Like if you pull it 6 feet high, I want you to catch it 6 feet.
Go get it.
Yep.
Go get it with your shoulders.
Yep. And then as the weight gets heavier, what will happen is that you'll be catching it lower and lower and lower and lower and lower.
Because you won't be able to.
And so that's kind of how I work with people to transition into cleaning, is just keep adding that weight until they're eventually having to do a squat to stand up out of the bottom.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This is cool. Like, I've never thought of it that way. I've always thought of it like, oh, I'm doing a power clean, so I will catch in a quarter squat. Or, oh, I'm doing a clean, so I will catch in a full squat. And this is like a whole different, almost philosophy of like, it doesn't matter. You're going to meet it where it's at.
Right.
I was never taught that. That's cool.
Yeah.
And I actually like to do that when I'm warming up my clean is I'll, especially for somebody who's having that problem of crashing, warm up with power cleans, catching it tall, and then going lower and lower and lower and lower.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it really helps, I think, ingrain that pattern of staying connected to the bar.
So when you have a client, let's say it's a client of ours, and they're doing a 4-day split, and they've got a kind of a light or volume deadlift day, and they have an intensity deadlift day, and they say, hey, I want to start adding this. Let's say we're going to start with just the power clean. Let's say the first thing we're going to add is the power clean. Maybe you'll do both power clean and power snatch, but for now, the power clean. I think what I'm hearing you say is you would take that lighter volume deadlift day and you would make that power clean. And you would also probably move it to the first movement of the day.
Yep.
Squat second.
Yep.
And I do the same thing. And I'll usually do stuff like triple. It's lower reps, right?
Yeah.
It's usually not more than triples.
1 to 3 reps.
Yep.
For a set, for sure.
And then for me on the deadlift, because I lost the volume day for the deadlift, I'll usually add volume to the intensity day of the deadlift. So I'll still do the intensity set, like a top set of 3, but maybe I was doing no back off sets, but I'll do some back off sets to get a little more volume in on the deadlift because I'm trying to hold on to some of that I pulled for the clean.
Yeah, I think early on that's fair. I think as you do more and more weightlifting and add more and more of that pulling volume in, then there's less of a need to compensate with heavy deadlifts. I mean, so you can kind of phase that out over time. But definitely when you're first starting out and you're just trying to figure out the lifts, you're going to have to add in some other pulling volume to compensate. But once you're doing 2-3 times a week of snatches and clean jerks, I think you can significantly reduce your deadlift volume. And I think you have to at some point.
Sure.
I've felt heavy pulls affect my snatch and clean and jerk 3-4 days after.
Sure.
It's funny because when you look at it from a Monday to the weekend, like Monday being the beginning of the week, it looks like it's a light, medium, heavy, but really most of them are prioritizing Saturday or Friday to be like the competition day because that's where most meets are.
Yeah.
So it's a heavy, light,
fresh
medium.
enough, get heavy.
And yet they're putting their heavy pulls usually in one of those light or medium days.
Yeah.
Because they'll take Thursday and Friday off so they can go heavy on Saturday.
I feel like what you just said is that same thing that coaches or whoever would say, like, don't deadlift or you're going to make yourself slow. It's kind of what you just said.
It's just a fatigue problem,
It's more fatigue.
So that's what it actually means. I don't think coaches understand that. That's what actually makes sense is, yeah, of course you're fatigued. You just pulled like a heavy set of 3 or a heavy set of 5. Of course you're fatigued for a few days, rather than that over sweeping generalization of if you deadlift, you're going to be slow.
Yeah, no, it's definitely.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like if you're an endurance trainer and you run or bike endurance, like we know that there is something that happens biologically over time where your body gives preference to slow twitch muscle fibers over fast twitch muscle fibers. That actually would make you slow. But heavy deadlifts don't use slow twitch muscle fibers as their primary contraction fiber. And so they're both using fast twitch.
Yep.
How often do you, Andrew? Sometimes I'll do, I think the first person I heard, I think it was George Friend that did this, where he would work up on his cleans. And let's say he could clean 60% or 65% of his deadlift. Like he had a fairly high percentage. Mm-hmm. And when he got done with his cleans, in order to continue to drive deadlift, he would just keep adding weight.
Yes.
Maybe he would even do power pulls for a set or two, and then on up to deadlifts and do that. And so it's sort of very efficient. You can still get the deadlifts in.
Yep.
It's not a lot of, but all of that warm up deadlift is actually in the clean.
I think that's another great way to add power cleans and power snatches in is, like, say it's your volume day, put the power cleans right in front of your light deadlifts.
Right.
And just warm up your deadlift with power cleans.
And your light deadlifts are still heavier than your cleans.
Right. For sure.
Even though they're your light deadlifts.
Yep.
Yeah. Especially in the beginning.
I think that's a great way to do it. It's super efficient. You can do power snatch and then you can do snatch pulls. Same idea. It's a little bit lighter weight, usually clean poles, they'll call them in the weightlifting world.
Right.
You add a little shrug at the top, or that's what gets kind of fun. I think when you start adding weightlifting in is that you just bring in a bunch more exercises that you can get creative with, mix and matching them to get the same sort of stress that you're looking for, and partner different pieces together. Or like you said, Niki, I really like to break the lifts down into different components, in large part because cueing doesn't quite work the same. I think this is another important thing from a coaching perspective, is that like you don't have 3 to 4 seconds per rep where you can be cueing somebody on the way down and the way down up or back up. I actually don't like lifters thinking while they're snatching and cleaning. They really need to be focused on just doing. Maybe they've got time to feel a couple of positions. So the way that I prefer to cue or have people fix technical issues is to break them down into different pieces. So you can either maybe pull from a block or pull from a hang or do a muscle snatch or some variant of the main lifts that forces you to practice the movement the way that we want it to do. And also it can modulate the intensity.
So for that person who's just starting to dip their toe into that Olympic lifting pool, they're not competitive yet. They just want to start playing around with the lifts. They think it sounds fun and cool, and they've sort of paid their dues through the novice training and the certainly at least early intermediate training. We add the power clean or a variation of the clean on that light deadlift day. Where do you put the snatch? I tend to put it on, especially if they're on a 4-day split, I'll tend to put it on the upper body day as the first movement.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you do there?
So what I would typically do for a 4-day split is change it so that they're not our kind of traditional Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. I'd probably go with something more that was like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and then do more of like heavy, light, medium. So it could be power cleans on Monday or snatches on Monday, power cleans on Wednesday, and then your heavier pull on Friday or Saturday.
Okay.
That's how I would like to organize it. But yeah, you could do the same thing on the upper body day.
Yeah.
I find that it's important to pay attention to where the heavy pulls are, because those can make it rough,
right,
to snatch if they're too close.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense. Okay. So first step.
Cool.
Do you tend to bring in the power clean only, or do you bring in both the power clean and power snatch at the same time if somebody wants to start?
I mean, if they haven't been power cleaning, I'd definitely start with the power clean. And then,
okay, only.
Yeah, just to get them. Some it's going to depend on the athleticism of the individual.
Sure.
If they're doing the power clean and they hate life, we'll stick with just that.
Right.
And then we can add in the snatch when that's not so frustrating.
Got it. And then again, always remembering that you have this budget of if you were doing a heavy squat, a light squat, a heavy deadlift, a light deadlift, a heavy press, a light press, a heavy bench press, a light bench press, and you add lifts, something has to give. You can't just continue that and also add one extra lift per day. Okay, we're going to also add a power snatch day, a power clean day, a full snatch day, and a full clean day on top of the exact same thing I'm already doing. Something has to be, you got to give to get is part of that deal.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times the bench press that's one of the ones that gets sacrificed.
Yep.
Some guys don't bench at all. Some guys will move from 2 times bench to only 1 time or once every other week, or it's a close grip.
Yep.
Press, obviously, if you're jerking, there's still a lot of overhead stuff. So a lot of times you'll replace one of the presses with maybe a jerk or a push press or some version of a more explosive version of a press.
Pressing slots tend to get eaten up, and there's not much carryover between the press and the jerk, unfortunately. I mean, I've seen some guys jerk over 200 kilos that can't barely press 200 pounds.
Right.
You know, some countries still develop a lot of pressing strength, but driving your press up isn't going to drive
it's really it's a lower body throw and a drop. There's actually not a ton of upper body strength there, which
if you're doing it right, you aren't pressing at all.
Right. Which is really kind of that's the sad piece of losing the clean and press after 72, is there was still that you still had to be strong enough to have upper body that could press a bunch of weight that now you don't have to have. Olympic lifting guys they look weird. Well, what I mean by that is like they kind of have a look to them, kind of like wrestlers. You know, if you see really good college wrestlers, they all kind of have the same look. Really good MMA fighters, they've got this, they've got this look to them. And Olympic lifters are kind of the same thing. Like they all look like Pyrrhus Demas. They're running around. I mean, unless they're like
huge traps, forearms, giant erectors.
The weight classes skew so much towards that lighter body weight that
that's right.
You end up with these guys with oil can legs and no upper body.
That's right.
And it's not until you get up to like the 105s, the 110s, then you have some like kind of normalish looking. Yeah. That's where Klokov, those guys are hanging out,
Yeah.
You can get jacked up there.
Yeah. Awesome. So that's a good place to start. And if you're a coach or if you're a client and you're looking to add that, you should email Andrew and ask him questions.
Don't ask me questions.
Don't send Niki emails about how to
power clean. We're only going to power clean, and it's never going to get any.
I do actually have a handful of my lifters doing that, and by the way, I actually like coaching it. I like doing cleans. I don't like doing snatch very much. I haven't done it a ton. I did it for a while. One of the things about snatch you were talking about, I started doing the snatch. I already had a 700-pound plus deadlift.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got to a 100 kilo snatch pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
And then to go from 100 to even like 105 was awful. It was the opposite of what most people deal with, where it's like, okay, they get their technique pretty good. And then they just have to get stronger. And there's no way it's going to get better unless they get stronger. And for me, I was already like a 700-pound deadlift is plenty strong enough.
Yeah.
It was just figuring out how to make those tiny little tweaks in the technique to get 2.5 kilos was frustrating. And so
one of the things I think is good about training the power clean or the power snatch is that, particularly for people that haven't been competitive or haven't really driven their deadlift to really high levels, is that it trains you to generate max velocity. And I mean, I know we're kind of biased to that because we were talking about that rep 1 tracking our velocity, but if people haven't experienced how to do that for their deadlift, even, I mean, that benefits the deadlift to try to move the bar as fast as you can. So it's a good training tool for your strength lifts as well. Yeah,
that's a great point. I found myself a lot lately talking to my clients about, don't yank the bar off the floor on a deadlift. But once the bar comes off the floor, try to accelerate it. Try to move it as fast as you can. Be real intentional. And I've got a couple of guys that they're just like the tortoise from The Tortoise and the Hare. They're just like, and they all look the same. Like they deadlift 450 plus for reps, but 225 is slow, 450 slow. It's all just like, I'm like, are you trying to move this thing fast? That was always one of the things I liked about the prowler with somebody when you started doing conditioning. If you put them on like a C2 rower and they've never learned how to like really go, you're like, go as hard as you possibly can. And they're just like, row your boat. And you're like, no, hold on. Your kids are drowning in the middle of a lake and you're rowing to get them. And they still wouldn't row fast. And I was like, okay, get off. And then I just put a whole bunch of weight on a prowler and I would be like, make this move. And then they have to push as hard as they can. Like they've never done it. You're exactly right. Being explosive with heavy weight and or under fatigue is a skill. That is a skill, especially to maintain technique under those circumstances. And so I think that's one of the really cool things that Olympic lifting brings to the table.
Cool.
We are not anti-Olympic weightlifting at Barbell Logic Online Coaching. It is a little bit hard to coach online.
Yeah.
Although it's, like Andrew said, you can't really give cues during the lift. So it's not that hard. I think the thing that I've noticed with trying to coach the Olympic lifts online is that you can actually tend to make more difference in person between reps or between sets. And you can't do that online. You can only make those changes from session to session. Whereas on like a squat, I could give you a cue on the descent on a squat, and I could give you another cue on the ascent on a squat. And you basically can't give any cue on the Olympic lifts unless I've seen people give, and I've done this myself, you kind of you give a cue about 2 seconds before it's actually going to happen.
Yes.
So you get them thinking about the thing they're going to do in 2 seconds, not what you want them to do right now. And then you can't, it's a little bit tougher to coach, but it's a lot of fun. And if you want to do it, we certainly don't want to discourage you from it. And so we've got ways to add it to your programming, especially if you've gone through that fire of novice training and intermediate, and you're in one of those places of one of our normal intermediate style. You made those MED changes, you're doing 4-day splits or something like that, heavy, light, medium. That's a real good place to bring in some Olympic lifting and have some fun there.
Cool.
Thank you guys for being on the show. This has been another episode of the Barbell Logic podcast. Hopefully it brought you some value there for those of you who are trying to figure out how to have a little fun with some cleans and or some snatches. Add them to your programming. If you like the show, we would love a 5-star review. We have very, very, very close to 1,000 5-star reviews at this point. We'd love to hear nice words that you have to say about us. Made some updates to the show lately. Niki's on the show. We've also been putting out these series we've teased out, and I've already listened to. It's fantastic. Dr. Jonathan Sullivan's got a series coming out for the Barbell Logic podcast here in the first week of October about just barbells and health, and it is outstanding. So we got some guest hosts coming in the future, and so let us know what you think. Let us know about some of those changes. Let us know what you want to hear about, and we will catch you next Monday. See you then.